guys, in this video we're going to talk about AICE History Paper 1, Question B, specifically on the reliability analysis. If you're looking for any other information on your Question B, go ahead and review the other video on Paper 1, Question B. So for this one, we're looking at specifically reliability or credibility. This is probably the most complex part of any of the AICE history papers, at least for the AS level. The reason for that is that you've probably never really thought about the reliability of something you're reading. You a lot of times think if you're presented with a source in class that it's automatically reliable. However, that's not always the case, and you really need to be critical thinkers, and this aspect of the paper really promotes that. So don't be ashamed if you do not grasp this concept right away. You will need a lot of practice and a lot of good feedback to make sure that you've mastered this part of your question. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how you actually analyze the credibility, what steps you need to take and what you need to think about. And then we're going to piece it all together so you can determine how reliable a source actually is. And finally, we're going to put it all together to actually answer the final question of Question B. Do the sources actually support the viewpoint in the question? Because you need that reliability aspect to really hammer in a solid answer for that to get the highest possible marks on that rubric. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing you need to look at when you're assessing reliability is the origin of the source. In other words, where did the source come from? Who wrote the source? Now, you're not always going to be given an author. If it's a newspaper article, you're probably just going to be given the name of the newspaper or the location of the newspaper. And that would be all the information you would really need there, because that would take us on to our next part of this. And that is, what do you know about the person or potentially newspaper or book that wrote the source? And how does that impact it? Do you know, for instance, if you're doing the American option, which your paper 1 is Origins of the Civil War, if your newspaper is The Liberator, you should know from your class that The Liberator was an anti-slavery newspaper. Therefore, that's going to be a big guide on what they're saying in their actual source, and that's going to basically give you an idea of what kind of information you can expect or a viewpoint you can expect to see in this source. So you also need to think about what you know of the views of the origin of the source. Once again, using the Liberator as an example, you know they're an anti-slavery newspaper, so you know that's going to be the slant they're taking on any issue that's presented. Or if it's a politician on a specific law that's being presented, did they write the law? Do you know from contextual knowledge that they oppose the law? And how's that going to impact what they actually said in the source? And of course, you need to look at, do they have a direct link to the subject matter of the paper? Because that's going to give you a lot of information here. So the next thing you need to look at is the intended audience. In other words, the person who created the source was delivering a message to a specific person or group of people. And that will really tell you a lot about the credibility of the source. So you need to think about how the intended audience shaped the nature of the message itself. Let's use a couple examples here. If we go back to our early example of the newspaper The Liberator, which once again was an anti-slavery newspaper, the majority of their readership would have been supportive of their views as well. So they would have also been abolitionists or people who supported the abolishment of slavery. So it can be inferred based off of that newspaper that their audience is going to be angled towards fellow abolitionists or fellow people who are opposed to slavery. Or you might think of it as a politician. If the politician is giving a speech to a room full of supporters, that message is going to sound a whole lot different than if that politician is delivering a message to a group of people he's trying to convince to support him. It will definitely change the shape of the message. So you have to consider who the intended audience was for this source. And a lot of that will come into effect with the next aspect of analyzing credibility. The next thing you really need to do here is to look at the purpose of the source. Once you've looked at the origin and the intended audience, you can really analyze what the purpose for the source was. What is the overall intention? Why was the source created? Was it intended to persuade the audience into a certain way of thought? Was it intended to incite emotions or encourage a course of action for the readership or the people who are hearing it? That will give you a lot of information on the purpose and also really help you get to the heart of the credibility of it. However, sometimes sources are also intended specifically just to explain something, and that'll also be clear in the message. Now, one big key thing that helps you understand and analyze the purpose of a source is to look at the tone and the language used in the source. Is the source overtly aggressive, angry? Is it overtly optimistic, pessimistic, or negative? That will tell you a lot about the purpose and therefore will also really hint about how reliable a source is. Typically, a source that's intended to incite emotions using sarcasm or using negative or overly positive speech or tones or words is not going to be the most reliable. So those are things you really need to pay attention here whenever you're trying to get to the heart of reliability. Now that we've got our reliability analysis done for all four of our sources, let's put it together to make a sustained judgment. All right, so let's look at each one of these sources here. Let's say that source A shows some support for the statement in the question and is slightly reliable. Source B strongly challenges the statement in the question but is moderately unreliable. Source C slightly challenges the statement and is extremely reliable. Source D, on the other hand, pretty strongly supports the statement but is also very strongly unreliable. Now the question here is, overall, do the sources support or challenge the statement? Based off of the information here, it would be easy to argue, or the best way to argue this one would be that the sources challenge the statement. This is based predominantly on the strong reliability of source C. Although source A and D support the statement, the reliability issues here, where D is slightly less reliable than B and A is only slightly reliable, show that overall the sources lean more towards C based off of reliability. Let's look at another example where A strongly supports and is strongly reliable, B slightly challenges it and is moderately unreliable, C is neutral but moderately reliable, and source D strongly challenges it but is completely unreliable. Here, I would say you would argue that overall the sources support the statement in the question because of the strength of the argument for A and the strength of its reliability. Now, I wanted to point out something here because I wanted to make sure you guys don't fall into this trap. It might be easy to look at B and D, which challenge the statement, and automatically say that the sources overall do not support the question in the prompt. However, the reliability aspect is where this is important here because those are unreliable sources. Therefore, you really want to look at that reliability aspect and point out that overall, because of the strength of A and the overall strength of C too, even though it's neutral, it really pulls away from the challenge here and goes more towards the support here. Finally, some things to remember here with your credibility or reliability analysis. Don't forget to ask who wrote the source, who the intended audience was, and why the source was created. Keep in mind that the number of sources do not prove overall support for the statement in the prompt. You have to look at that reliability aspect. And note that overall, the sources can strongly, partially, or weakly support the statement in the prompt. There can be levels of strength here. Do not forget that. Thank you for watching the video today. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and please check back for more videos.